In the past few segments, I've mentioned two important environmental challenges, namely carbon dioxide emission and ozone depletion. I've also gone through some past policies that you should keep in mind. But as I mentioned, people do not always follow policies. In fact, people do not even follow what they themselves believe in. Why do I say so? If I ask you, do you have an environmental friendly attitude? I bet most of you would answer you do. But what if I ask you, do you always switch off your lights? Do you try your best to recycle? Would you rather take public transportation despite you can afford to take taxi or drive? You might not always act environmentally, even if you endorse environmental friendly attitude. Private car emission accounts for 1/5 of all US emissions. Cars and trucks are responsible for 1/3 of Beijing's smog. But private car usage has been on the rise in both developed countries and developing countries. We see that private cars emission is devastating and is a huge contributor for carbon dioxide emission. Let's dissect what are some of the government policy on protecting environment in this aspect. As a case study, we will use Singapore, a place where car purchase has been growing despite serious effort from the government. For example, the average cost of owning and maintaining a Toyota Corolla for 10 years for normal daily commute was over 22,000 Singaporean dollars per annum in 2011. ERP, electronic road pricing, was implemented to make driving expensive, while public transportation is cheap and relatively accessible. But yet, car purchasing and cars on the roads are increasing exponentially. What did the government do wrong, and how can we understand this? There are two possibilities. Perhaps Singaporeans are just not so environmental friendly. On the other hand, there could be other factors driving people's motivation to drive. If this is the case, what are these factors? To understand the above, myself and Professor Chi-Yu Chiu from the Chinese University of Hong Kong conducted a study on understanding people's perception on private car driving. In this particular study, we used an experimental sampling method where we recruited 600 participants to record down all their trips in a travel diary. In this travel diary, they have to write down the length of their trip, the to and from location, rate each car ride, the reason they take the ride, the form of transportation they take, whether they are traveling alone or with a group. They also have to tell us whether they are car owners, their demographic information, and their environmental attitudes. At the end of our study, we were able to collect data for 8,335 trips in total. We found that, indeed, all of our participants are relatively high on environmental awareness values, meaning that they are self-proclaimed environmentalists. Yet, their environmental values are not always important in predicting whether they would take environmental-friendly actions. What we found in this study is that environmental values are only important when we are traveling alone. But when we are traveling with others, we use normative perception to gauge what kind of transportation we want to use. What are normative perception on car driving? In this current study, we gave participants 6 types of transportation means to evaluate, including bus, subway, taxi, SUV, luxury sedan, and normal sedan. We found that Singaporeans believe those that use a certain types of vehicle, for example, luxury sedan, possess a certain quality that deemed desirable by fellow Singaporeans. Most importantly, it is such aspiration to become that type of Singaporean that motivates them to use private car when they are traveling with others. The conclusion is that when commuting alone, private environmental friendly attitudes matter. But when commuting with others, normative representations of Singaporeans' behaviors matter. The implication is that the image of car drivers are important to manage environmental behaviors. Also, electric car sharing are options that are viable but need to be properly managed.